Welcome to the Gaslight Effect Podcast. I'm Robin Stern, co-founder and associate director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and author of the best-selling book, The Gaslight Effect. I'm an educator and a psychoanalyst, but first and foremost, I'm a wife, a mother, a sister, aunt, and healer. And just like many of you, I was a victim of gaslighting. Please join me for each episode as I interview fascinating guests and explore the concept of gaslighting. You'll learn what it truly means to be gaslighted, how it feels, how to recognize it, and how to understand it, and ultimately, how to get out of it. Before we begin, I want you to know that talking about gaslighting can bring up challenging and painful emotions. Give yourself permission to feel them. Some of you may want to go more deeply with your emotions, while some of you may hold them more lightly. No matter what you're feeling, know that your emotions are a guide to your inner life. Your emotions are sacred and uniquely you. Respect and embrace them, for they have information to give you. If you want to listen to other episodes of the Gaslight Effect podcast, you can find them at robinstern.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you for being here with me. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Gaslight Effect Podcast. I couldn't be more thrilled than I am today to welcome with me for our 100th episode of the Gaslight Effect Podcast, my beautiful and brilliant daughter, Melissa Wild. Melissa, I hope that you will tell our listening audience everything important that you do in the world. But the one thing that I do want to say is in all your important functions, you are a person with integrity and warmth and brilliance and the highest values. And I couldn't be more proud of who you are and not just about what you do. So please tell everybody what you do, what your work is in the world, and I will take a little bit of pride and credit maybe for inspiring some of that interest, since you're working to make the world a better place every day.
Thank you, Mom. And hello, listeners of the Gaslight Effect. This is very fun. So Melissa Wild, I'm an applied anthropologist, and I am the founder and executive director of UPeace New York, where we are expanding upon the mission of the University for Peace, founded under a UN treaty in 1980 and based in Costa Rica, although I'm here in New York. And I would say beyond that, the other important factors are that I've mostly been trained in learning languages, and that was one of my first passions other than dance. And so getting a window into the world through languages has always been kind of my first passion, interest, and curiosity, and that has led me into the field of peace building and mediation. And yeah, that's what I do.
Thank you. Our team at the Gaslight Effect Podcast thought that for the 100th episode, it would be fun to turn the tables and have someone interview me, my daughter, who was and is intimately involved in what I do every day by knowing about it and being a wonderful sounding board and sometimes an editor and sometimes the person on the other side of a role play. But certainly in the days that I was writing Gaslight Effect, I would read it out loud and we would talk about it. And sometimes my daughter and my son, who is not here and will be very amused by watching this episode, would say, "Mom, I think you just gaslighted me." And so if you remember those days, Melissa, then you can join me in knowing why we asked you to be the 100th episode guest.
Well, thank you, Mom. Yeah, it's interesting because these days a lot of my work has led to conversations around intergenerational learning. And I'm really excited to learn with you and talk with you and give you a chance to share with your listeners some of the other parts of what made up your professional life and led you into the work of identifying gaslighting in your practice and then really making it something that's known and building out frameworks of how people can address that in their own lives. So let's go back to when you first were building out this idea of the book, The Gaslight Effect. And I'm curious, maybe this is a two-parter, but first, I'm curious if you knew at the time when you were starting to think about this book that it was going to become household everyday language. And then I also would love for you to take us back to that time in your life when I can't remember anymore, I think preteen.
Well, it was published in 2013 for the first time.
So, okay, no, actually, past preteen, but in any case, young. If you can tell us what it was like for that idea to emerge and to solidify for you, even in your personal life, like what pieces were coming together for you as you made sense of this and clarified what gaslighting, what you'd really come upon that you wanted to share with the world. So that two-parter question, and in whatever order you want.
Okay, well, thank you. I think at that time, at the time that I was thinking about writing the book of gaslighting, or thinking about writing a book at all, it was really initially about emotional abuse, and I hadn't come up with the title, The Gaslight Effect, yet, although the particular kind of emotional abuse I was interested in was psychological abuse, or no, it was emotional abuse, but also psychological abuse, where someone would suddenly, in a moment, go from completely being rooted in their own reality to saying, well, maybe he's right. And at that time in my life and in our lives, I was very involved with the Woodhull Institute. And at Woodhull, we were seeing and training many young women. The Woodhull Institute for Ethical Leadership was founded by myself and Margot McGowan and Naomi Wolf and Erica Jong and Melissa Bradley and Gina Amaro and Susan Deviney at the time, who's now Susan Kane. And ultimately, over time, our executive director was Wendy Yeager Hyman. And we saw women coming through our doors, sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly, to learn the skills that they needed to do to live the lives they wanted to live in order to make their dreams come true. And we found that because we found that women in their 20s and 30s had dreams that outstripped their skill sets. And one of the things that we were on the lookout for was being rooted in our own voices, because many of us, or many of the young women that we saw, came in their 20s and they would talk about what they thought they ought to be doing and what they thought too about themselves when they weren't doing what they ought to be doing in life. And it turned out that they felt that their own reality was superseded all the time by the strong voices of either their parents or a boyfriend or a powerful mentor. And so women were questioning themselves. Saw a lot of that. What I also saw a lot of, not only at Woodhull, but in my friend group, were women who were very confident in who they were, very confident in their ideas, very confident in lifting their voices, and completely uncertain about themselves in one particular relationship. And I was fascinated by that because it reminded me of the movie Gaslight. And in the 1944 version of the movie Gaslight, that I had seen many times and really was very drawn to, for the moment that this woman gave up her reality, the main character, played by Ingrid Bergman, was a woman who was very confident, madly in love with this guy. And as he started to manipulate her and tell her there was something wrong with her, she would say, oh, don't be silly. That couldn't possibly be true. That's not me. I'm not forgetful. And suddenly, as he engineered the world around her so that she was, in fact, losing things, was, in fact, forgetting, seemingly to forget things, she began to question herself until the point where he was trying to drive her crazy and he succeeded. She was feeling crazy. He was telling her every day that she was crazy, and she began to feel like she was. So that was what was going on in my professional life, alongside of my having a private practice. I hadn't met Mark Brackett yet. I hadn't written a book yet. And it was my colleague at Woodhull, Naomi Wolf, who really encouraged me to write a book, and was there with me when I saw an instance of a father gaslighting his son in Washington Square Park. And when we saw that, and the child was so young, and the child looked so crestfallen when the father said, "What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you?" I thought, I have to write this book.
What's fascinating about hearing you talk about this in retrospect is I keep, like, now, especially with the way that our generation and really just everybody these days is consuming information, be it news outlets or just social discourse through online spaces. This term of being gaslit has become just everyday language that people use to talk about people they don't know, they've never met, or to talk about the media in general. And you can see this from all kinds of from people with all kinds of political persuasions and positions. And, there's a part of this conversation that would take us somewhere else that has more to do with how media impacts message and things like that. But what I'm interested in is how this relates to how we address conflict, how we stay committed to our own values while also recognizing and being able to name and address gaslighting in different contexts. And I say this because back when you were working on this book, I remember, I feel like this is probably with lots of things, when you're working on highly focused on something and you've made some observation in the world and you're in your practice of making sense of that, you start to see it in all these other places, or you see where it isn't also, right? Like you found its boundaries or its edges. And I remember you always asking me about friendships that I had in my life, asking me if I felt that that's what I really wanted to do. If a friend asked me to do something for them, is that really what I really wanted to do? Or just was I maybe over, like kind of doing the most, to say it simply, like doing too much for others and not really recognizing what my own needs were in any particular relationship. And I remember I used to feel very frustrated when you would ask me that question. And you would usually ask it as like a noticing. I'm noticing you're doing da 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 da. In case anyone wants to know what it's like to grow up with a psychologist for a mother. But but you would ask it in that way, but it was frustrating to me and kind of disarming, because it's like this observation maybe I haven't made yet that is hard to hear from an outside perspective, let alone from your mother's perspective. So I'm curious but anyway, to finish that thought, I now, looking back, can appreciate why you asked me that question. And I wonder if part of why you were noticing those things was also because you were working on this book at the same time, and what it's like for you these days, now that everybody is talking about gaslighting in all kinds of contexts, what that is like for you to help people make sense of both what is gaslighting and also what is not, and to like make sense of that boundary so that people can figure out where they place themselves in navigating through that kind of dynamic in a relationship.
Well, wow. I really appreciate the question. And I'm very so moved by the fact that you remember those conversations. I remember them very well. And I think what's really interesting about where you're asking us to focus is that, yes, I was writing the book. And so, yes, I was more aware of that. But I also became more aware of it and was able to incorporate more of real life examples in the book because of what I saw you and your friends going through. Specifically, that, I mean, you were pretty strong and confident young girl. And yet, in these relationships, you would often step into someone else's shoes, see their perspective, and then forget that you even had shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember You're giving pieces of yourself over to friendships in a way that happens all the time in gaslighting. And it's okay to accommodate. In fact, we want to accommodate to other people in relationships. We want to be reasonable and listen to someone else's side and maybe, okay, this time I'll accommodate. But when you start giving up pieces of yourself so that you're exhausted because you're doing their bidding, and I know we're thinking about the same things as I'm telling you this or as we're talking about this, or really questioning whether or not it's okay to say no when the no would just serve your needs, but frustrate the other person. I mean, that's the territory of gaslighting. And so I was seeing it not only in your relationships, but certainly in, as I said, in my friend relationships, where strong, powerful women were coming up with these crazy ideas about the things in their relationship that their husbands or boyfriends had told them were their fault.
Mm-hmm.
That clearly there weren't. Those things were not their fault. And also, I was going through my own situation with your biological father, who was, whenever he was late, I would bring up the fact that he was late. He would tell me that I had a problem with time. And I wrote about that in the book. So I'm not saying anything on this podcast that I wouldn't say to him if I had the chance or didn't say publicly already. And it was so interesting for me because I knew that he was not right. I knew that I wasn't the one with the problem with time. And yet he insisted over time. I began to think, well, maybe I am a little rigid about time.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though I was writing the book, we were talking about it at home. I still, I guess that was actually after that I had been writing the book, but during the time that I was developing the ideas and he was telling me that, I thought, I know this is gaslighting. And I'm falling prey to that same question. Maybe he's right.
Mm-hmm.
And I do want to say that there was someone who I'm no longer in touch with, and I do hope he's well and his family is well. Uh, a friend of ours who's a lawyer, whose name is Mike Frankfurt, who at the time said to me, "You have no idea how big this book is going to be."
Mm.
And he said, "This is a very important book." And he represented my interest in along with my agent at that time. And I couldn't have foreseen that the book would be, even in this day, all these years later, 23 years later, thinking about gaslighting and how popular it's become and how misused it's become, to your point. So gaslighting got a big marketing boost in Trump's second run for, oh no, in the first term that ran for election. And people were calling him the king of gaslighting. And suddenly the word was everywhere, and newspapers and magazines and shows were interviewing me and asking me if Mr. Trump was a gaslighter, and were very interested in the term gaslighting. We were seeing things on TV that then people were denying, and people in leadership were denying. And then as the term became more popular and people began to use it relationally, they began to weaponize it. Everything became gaslighting. And anytime anybody didn't like what somebody was saying, I mean, this is a generalization, then they would say, "You're gaslighting me." Or if there was a disagreement, "You're gaslighting me." Or if we were in conflict, "You're gaslighting me." And gaslighting is a very specific dynamic where the intention of the person doing the gaslighting is to sow seeds of doubt or seek to undermine the reality of the person they're gaslighting and cause them to question their judgment, their character, their perception, or something else about them. And so it's flipping the conversation. So if I say to you, or if you and your friends are having an argument and you say, "Well, but you didn't save me a seat at lunch," and your friend's like, "Melissa, you're so sensitive,"
Mm-hmm.
right? That's a moment of gaslighting. It doesn't make a relationship a gaslighting relationship, but you can either walk away from that moment and think, maybe she's right. Maybe I am sensitive, or I am sensitive. That's the problem. Or if you aren't vulnerable to gaslighting, you may walk away and say, I am sensitive, but what does that have to do with the fact that you didn't save me a seat?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting, so as I mentioned before for the listener, so I've been trained in mediation at the community level, community dispute resolution, and and did my master's in conflict resolution and think a lot about and have worked in spaces where I'm facilitating dialogue between people of different privileges and genders, religions, et cetera, and who are in conflict usually. And what's interesting about the specific example you gave of the saving a seat at lunch and then somebody saying you're too sensitive, from my perspective, which is not the psychologist's perspective, is just obviously what's the context around that, what's the history of those relationships that led to that particular interaction. But just to think about that specific moment is the deflecting part and the labeling part.
Mm-hmm.
So by saying you're too sensitive, you're moving the conversation away from what that person had just said. So you are actively not listening, active listening being one of the very important elements of a productive, progressive conversation. And then the other is you're giving somebody a label of something specific. And in doing so, shutting down the openness to moving that dialogue forward. So it's interesting to hear about it as an instance of gaslighting, because like you said about when you were talking about my own friendships and things that you were noticing back when you were writing the book, there are elements that are similar to or maybe close to gaslighting that are still useful tools to recognize or useful dynamics to be able to identify that may not be gaslighting, but being able to keep those, to recognize the boundaries of gaslighting is equally important as being able to name gaslighting. And I think part of it is part of where my concern around how people these days spend time dialoguing online is I don't see a lot of active listening happening, and I don't see a lot of concern for throwing around accusations and the consequences of doing so. It's very othering in a pretty clear binary kind of way. Speaking of binaries, I want to ask you another question that also has to do with my own experience and the kind of daughter that you've raised here. I think maybe we're
and
talking.
I'm so proud of you, honey.
Thanks, Ma. But yeah, 3 generations, I'm sure more. But for the listeners, we have a really strong women in our lineage, and my grandma, my mom's mother, being one of them, who always told my mom that she could be anything she wanted to be when she grew up. And my mom passed that on to me, and I'm very fortunate because of that. Those affirmations, although sometimes it was a bit overwhelming, but we'll stick with that, the fact of being fortunate part. But my grandma, your mom, she grew up at a time where I wonder if part of why she said that was because she couldn't really become whoever she wanted. And recognizing we are still talking about a woman who, had her own privileges and also her own challenges, being, you guys being the only Jewish family or one of the first Jewish families in the neighborhood where you grew up at the time, obviously being, having members of our family who had to flee or survive or didn't survive the Holocaust, but then also my grandma being a white woman and recognizing her privileges in that and how she wanted to serve her community and support change and support the civil rights movement, which I know she shared with you and made you a part of some of that work. Anyway, all of that background to say she still, in however strong she was, however determined she was for you to be able to be anything you wanted, she couldn't get there fully for herself in some of her own relationships and just the way that she lived her life. And I think it's safe to say both of us in different level to different degrees or have in our own ways have also dealt with the same issues of not being able to fully recognize or actualize what we want and part of that being related to being a woman. And so the reason I said back to binary is obviously gender being something that's not binary. There are experiences that feel like they really fuel this very dangerous binary of a man being able to move freely about the world without having to consider, without having to think about putting their own pieces of themselves aside, like you were saying, whereas women are the first to do it. And so I'm curious if you can think about how, like, I remember when you were writing the book, you always said to me, I'm doing this for me and I'm doing this for you. And I want you to know that, the things you see in the world, some of what you see in the world, no one else can see, and you deserve. And if you want to, you can put those ideas out in the world. And I remember that all being really important to you, to be able to like say this and share this with the world, that you were in this unique position to observe. So I'm curious if you can talk a bit with your listeners and me about how your experience as a woman raising a daughter impacted the way that you were able to write this book, and how it impacts you today and how you think about gaslighting, either from a gendered lens or not.
Thank you for that question. That's a fantastic question, because it allows me to talk about being a daughter and being a mother. And as I said, when you were listening to me talk about the book and its genesis and developing it, I don't know if grandma was still alive, if my mother was still alive, but I know that she passed certainly around the time in the years that the book was first published. And she would have been so proud of my being able to do what she encouraged me to do. And when I think about it, she grew up in a time where, and many listeners probably have seen the show Mad Men, or know of the show Mad Men. But if you haven't, have you seen it, Melissa?
Yes.
Okay, so that's how I grew up. I mean, my kitchen looked exactly like the kitchens in the Mad Men show. And there's no question that men did whatever they wanted. There was this, as I've been saying recently in some articles that I've been writing, the permission structure to do whatever they wanted. And I didn't think about my mother so much as being gaslighted, as being put down by my father whenever he felt like it. And then on the other hand, he would put her on a pedestal and talk about how beautiful she was and how amazing she was as an artist, and he's so proud of her, and she's selling her work and whatever other wonderful things he wanted to say about her, and what a wonderful mom she was. But at the same time, he would regularly undermine her. He would present an idea about business, and she would say something, and he would say, "Come on, you don't know anything about business. Or what do you know about business?" And she would shrink away and she wouldn't fight back. And those moments stayed with me. And I think she would tell me all the time, not only that I could do whatever I want in the world, but that she didn't do whatever she wanted because she was afraid.
I didn't know she
And
told you that.
that she applied and was accepted to an art therapy program.
Hmm.
And she didn't want me to tell anyone because she was afraid she would start the program and she wouldn't be successful. And she didn't really think she could do it, even though she was really smart, certainly very informed about politics, the world, and in many conversations, certainly opinionated. And from the way she would carry herself and the force with which she would put her ideas out, would be hard to know that she really was very insecure.
Mhm.
And I saw that. And I thought, my father did that to her. And there were times where, as much as I loved coming from an intact family, I would say to her, why do you put up with this? You know, and I never wanted to be somebody who would put up with bad behavior. It turns out I did, more times than I want to talk about or count here, more specific instances that I want to count, but happy that I'm in a wonderful place in my life now with a man who doesn't do those things to me. But But I think I specifically, when you were born, there was no question that I felt a need to do it differently with you than than my mother did with me, not in terms of affirmation, because she gave me plenty, and I wouldn't be where I am if she wasn't always nudging me to the next step and telling me I could do it, and I was really smart, and I have what it takes. But not wanting you to fall into those traps and seeing how it even begins to emerge in friendships, those kinds of power relationships, and how it's easy when you're loving and you're empathic and you can take on the other side's perspective, which is all wonderful stuff that I teach every day and that I taught you. You can also get stuck in those perspectives and give up yourself. So, being a founder of the Woodhull Institute, where we were teaching women skills, including the skill of saying no, and I don't want to, I don't think so, that doesn't feel comfortable. All of those things were a very important part of what we wanted to give young women because there wasn't another place where they were being taught that we knew about it. And it was the days before emotional intelligence skills that I do now through my all of my important work at Yale with Mark and other people. Those skills weren't being taught in schools at that time. It was hard to regulate emotions in interpersonally, and I actually would love to hear what you have to say about this and your own relationships and your personal experience with emotion regulation when it came to giving over yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know that one of the hardest things to do in a gaslighting relationship is to walk away when somebody is insisting that they know better and you know they don't, but you don't want them to think badly of you. So you have to stay till they change their perception, and that's never going to work.
Well, I mean, I think I don't want to go too specific in some parts of answering this, but in general, when I've been faced with that specific kind of a manipulation of gaslighting, instances of gaslighting in my relationships, I realized what happened to me is I just became split in two, simply put. And when I finally was away from those situations, I I then figured out that I no longer knew if I liked having this sort of split self, the version of me that works for this person or the version of me that only can exist outside of it, or if I wanted to merge those two. And I think it's something I still struggle with. And by the way, this isn't just even about intimate relationships, friendships, but it's also about the system, the structures in which
Yeah.
we work and live, where I know I have to edit myself or kind of regulate my response to things, which is fine on the one hand. I mean, that's an important skill. That's something that shows up in lots of different ways and has benefits, but regulate myself, my reactions to things in a way that sometimes feels like I'm going against my true values or my ethics for the sake of that particular professional environment, that particular moment, that person's house I'm at, those people I'm with. And this is where I know that you and my stepfather had a lot of very productive debate, was sort of around the like structure versus the whether we should be targeting and taking up issue with the structure that's in place that's leading to these toxic environments, or we should be helping people who are in those situations regulate their emotions to manage those toxic environments. And of course, what happened to me, I became a person who advocates for both.
Oh, right.
But I do think that just on the more emotion regulation side, that's what happened. I became split in two, and I still feel like I still feel like I'm trying to make sense sometimes of what is it that is most authentically true to who I am and want to be in the world, and how do I fully show up in all those spaces. And I think that that's something most people deal with, whether they've dealt with gaslighting or not. But yeah, it feels really extreme in the context of gaslighting. And it also creeps up now in my nervous system. Like when I'm dealing with a person that is not the person I dealt with before who gaslit me, and I'm in a new situation, the second I feel maybe I'm wanting something that's going to be inconvenient for that person or that dynamic, I then feel my nervous system get really activated. My heart starts racing, my mind starts spinning, and so then I, learn some tools to manage the physiological reaction or response to that no longer fits this situation. But until I can calm myself down physically, I won't be able to address what's actually in front of me. And I have to really like remind myself that's not that situation I used to be in. And that shows up in both professional and personal life circumstances.
I really appreciate you sharing that. Thank you.
Welcome, Mom.
This was so fun. You're so smart and well spoken and insightful and wise. And I just love thinking about how you really are the same person you were when you were a little girl and used to say to me, I know that's true. I know there's a place in my mind behind my brain.
For listeners, my mother is quoting a 5-year-old version of me. Um, Thanks, Mom. This was very fun, and you finally successfully got me on your podcast. And I'm very happy to have the chance to ask you questions and let the listeners see some more of the beautiful work you've done in the world and the other parts of the world that know you and love you like me. I have one more question that I want to ask you. But before I do, I just want to say also that it's really, really fun. And I talk about this all the time. I want to say two things about my mom here for everybody. One is it's really, really fun to see my mom be committed to being a lifelong learner because that kind of dedication to curiosity and to knowing that there's always more we need to check ourselves on, our biases, what we may not know yet, more information, more people is something that also supports emotional regulation and is just a beautiful gift also to me as her daughter
Oh,
that she's
thank
committed to
you.
lifelong learning and makes you an amazing psychologist. And then the other thing I wanted to say is it's really fun to see you like at the top of your game, doing things you've always wanted to do with your life and always looking for new and different ways to share your message and your work that just you're learning with the world. And so I love that you have this podcast and I love that there's so many listeners and I'm not surprised and I can't wait for 100 more episodes. And now I will go to my last question. So because I'm your daughter and I've gotten to know all the stuff, the people behind the person behind the work and not just this global recognized expert that you are, I'm curious if you can tell me what it's been like for you to learn and listen to the stories of all of these people that you've interviewed in these 100 episodes, how that has influenced and impacted your life now. So, sort of full circle, we talked about how your life was impacted by the stories you heard back when you started writing this book. And now to close it out, can you tell us what it's been like for you to live and move forward in the world in all of these different spaces with these new stories and conversations you've had over the course of these 100 episodes?
Wow, what a question. First of all, I'll just say that you said something earlier about all the beautiful work that I do in the world, but the most beautiful work was you and your brother.
Aw,
So it's so true. Anyway, so really the most beautiful thing that I've created in this world are my children. And so I couldn't be prouder of you.
thanks,
I'm now
Mom.
I'm imagining now that your brother's watching this and rolling his
I
eyes,
can't wait
but
for him to watch this.
I know. But to your question, I've learned that I continue to learn that people really need spaces to where they feel safe to talk about what's happened to them, where the people need, um, as we say at the Center, emotion allies, and people need people who care. and people to listen to them. And the people are so generous with their stories and so much more brilliant about what's actually going on with them if they stop to think about it. And because we live in a world where we're constantly racing and we're constantly doing and we're constantly fixing for other people, just to have an hour sometimes to unpack what you might have even unpacked before and learn something new. People are endlessly fascinating. And I don't want people to hurt, and I don't want people to put themselves through difficult situations. And I know for sure that that will always happen, that people will do that for other reasons, and that I will do that sometimes for other reasons, have a difficult moment, have a difficult relationship. And so that's why I do this work, because I want to be one of those people who is safe for people. I want my books, I want my work to be able to help and heal a small piece of what it can. And I look forward to the way you heal the world now, and to seeing more of you heal the world. And I have so much respect for all the experts that have been on my podcast, and feel so grateful for people's generous and vulnerable sharing. And I believe in people, and I believe that if people stick with themselves and lean into the social support and find the right emotion allies, that they will be able to do anything.
I think that's a pretty perfect closeout, Mom. And it's
And
really,
thank you.
thank you. Thanks for being interviewed on your own
I
podcast. One
know, it's so fun.
episode.
Okay, thank you everyone for listening. Obviously, this is a very special episode for me, to be with my daughter, to share my daughter with you, to share you with my daughter, and you're brilliant and beautiful and 5 years old in my heart, as well as 36 years old in real life.
Thanks, Mom. I'm
I
so
love
proud of
you.
you. Love you too.
Thanks for joining me for today's episode. I hope you found it helpful and meaningful. If you want to listen to other episodes of the Gaslight Effect podcast, you can find them at robinstern.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. And please leave a rating and a review. I also invite you to follow me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. I'm so grateful to have many people supporting me, and especially grateful for all of you, my listeners.